Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the second episode of the Content Intelligence series, a series where we'll be exploring the process to create engaging, high-performing content from a data-driven perspective. My name is Nick Markowitz, Senior Director of Content at BrightTALK, and I've been at BrightTALK for 9 years, working with our clients on helping better connect their audience through online presentations, webinars, virtual events, and series. Looking hopefully to build trust with their audience through their content. Before we get started, I want to remind the audience that this audience session is live interactive. As many of you have already done, please submit questions, provide feedback, as well as look at the attachments throughout the presentation as we're speaking about today's topic. And on that note, we'll get started. In our last episode, we explored how to create authentic connection with your audience by first understanding today's buying process and the role content plays in the purchasing process. In today's episode, we'll start by breaking down the elements of a data-driven content strategy, give you an insider's look at how we at BrightTALK use data to influence our content, and how your content mix really influences the customer journey. Now, let's get started. I find that there are about 8 different elements to a content strategy. When you're thinking about how you're going to create content, I think there are a few different elements that we'll look into. So for today, we won't be focusing on all of these, but I do want to go over these a little bit, and because these are very crucial and important to making sure that you're creating a consistent brand experience and digital experience for your audience. First and foremost, brand guidelines are important. I think that's pretty obvious. I'm not going to cover this too much, but making sure you have a consistent tone, feel, and look to your content is crucial in creating a consistent experience so people can recognize you from the get-go, from sight, as well as know what they're expecting from your content. Obviously you can't really have a content strategy without marketing objectives, understanding what you're trying to achieve and your goals. There's a lot of data, interesting aspects out there around how do you set up your goals, what should you be looking at across across your customer journey in terms of measuring. We will be covering this in a future episode, but not today. Personas, obviously knowing your audience is something we talked about in our last episode, but knowing your audience, developing personas, understanding the commonalities between your personas, the different behaviors, demographics, just to really understand what does your audience really care about. We'll talk a little bit about audience data and how you can leverage that for your content a little bit later. But today, we're going to be really focusing on these 2 aspects, market research and content mix. So how do you understand what's happening in your market? How do you understand what's happening with your brand? Looking at all that data, analyzing it, and turning that into a content mix that will inspire, educate, entertain, and convince your audience to work with you as a trusted partner. But of course, there is a lot more in terms of creating a strategy, resourcing, making sure that you can create the content with headcount, the right tools, the right data, content calendar and operations. Make sure you have a process for creating that content in a way that's scalable so that you can focus less on creating the content and more about strategizing around the content. And then obviously analytics, making sure you're measuring the right metrics and making sure that you are using analytics in a way where it is supporting and helping you identify gaps and opportunities and measuring the right type of performance. Like I said, we're going to be focusing today on market research and content mix, but in future episodes, we'll be covering more of these topics as we walk through the content creation process. But really, as we get started, and what we're going into today is really understanding your audience through your existing data. I think there is a general process that people need to work through in order to understand and really start developing a strategy that will work for them. Part of that focuses on understanding what data you currently have and being able to leverage that in a way that provides you the insights you need to make the right decisions. And so what we'll be going through a little bit today is a little about how BrightTALK has been doing some of their content strategy planning. It is the planning time of the year. Our fiscal year starts in January 1st. And so we're already starting this process. And so I'm going to be showing you a little bit about how BrightTALK looks at data and how we make decisions from that data. But first and foremost, with any content strategy, you need to understand, what existing channels are really performing best for you. What I'm showing you right now is a look at all of BrightTALK's channels that we're looking at exploring going into 2021. Many of these are existing channels that we've already built and will continue to build out. There are a few other ones that we're looking to test. I think part of the strategy as you're looking to create your own strategy is understanding what channels are currently performing well for you and I'll talk about what that means in a bit. But also looking at ways to test new channels and really focusing on this process of measuring, testing, and optimizing, which we'll cover in a bit. But as you see here, BrightTALK is looking at a few different sources for our own. Obviously, our own media, our own database is massive. Partners, we have a very large partner network that we work with in order to generate leads as well as create content. Intent data from both external and internal sources. SEO, obvious. It's so important especially with today's focus on all digital. Organic, paid social, our own audience. BrightTALK has the benefit of having 10 million users in which we can promote to our content, as well as PPC, media, and PR. What you see below is kind of where our domains land and where some of our content will land. So we have a more of a business site in addition to our website, our portal with all of the great content, and also third party. And so what we're looking at is how do we take all of our different channels, all the different content within those channels, and making sure they all work together in a way that it go in a cohesive manner. And so, what we're starting this process, actually, we started last month, is looking at some of this data to really understand where are we doing well and what are we doing not so well. Part of how we analyze this is looking at a multi-touch attribution model. So for those of you who do not know, a multi-touch attribution model looks at the various different touches in which your leads are touching your content, assuming that there is a first touch, a last touch, and a kind of mid-touch. So you see at the very top, there's a prospect where it's a new lead was created. That's our first touch. It could be any content that you created in which you've created that lead, usually obviously with some kind of gated format of content. But following that, because, and we talked a little bit about this in our previous episode, but the buyer's journey isn't linear. It isn't as straightforward as viewing a piece of content that's is top of funnel, then viewing a piece of content that's middle of funnel, and then someone's going to view a demo, right? It's a lot more complicated than that. And so, BrightTALK, we look at a variety of different things, but we're giving different weights to how did we first acquire that lead, how did we then convert that lead, and then what was their journey and kind of what content pieces played a part of that journey. And so you see here that we've been analyzing this quite a bit to really get a sense of what are our conversion metrics, what content is performing, what channels are performing best, and how can we double down on the channels and content they're doing well. How do we try new things to bring in more individuals to trying to educate, inspire, and convert across the board? Because really, you need to make sure that you're creating content that covers the customer journey, not just to acquire the prospects and allow your sales team to just follow up and then try and close them, but across the journey. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to do that in future episodes. But for today, I want to talk a little bit more about kind of our own data. So BrightTALK uses a reverse waterfall that uses a variety of our conversion metrics to determine our lead volumes by segment, right? Just like everyone else, BrightTALK has a variety of different segments and personas that we're trying to target. We work with many different industries, very much for marketers. So that's for us, it's a little bit simple. But we need to get a sense of how many leads do we generate in order to provide sales, and then how much content we generate from that. And so what you're seeing here is our reverse waterfall that looks at just some of our average conversion rates, as we plan for 2021. And so And so, what we're looking to do is taking our benchmark from our different segments and regions that we support, as well as the win ratios, conversion rates, the number of quality leads created, number accepted from our sales team, number of won. So that we have a kind of a rough plan, knowing that based off these benchmarks, we know that we'll need to create about, I think we're looking at anywhere between 12 to 20 pieces of content every month. And so, it's really important for you to get down to this level to understand really from a data perspective, where are you converting the best? What are your benchmarks? And then extrapolating to the point of how much content you need to create. And so for us, this is obviously a lot of our commercial internal data is helping us feed into our strategy and to really understand what is that volume of content we need to create. But it's not just the commercial data. That is one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of data tools out there, including tools that you already use to measure website traffic, things along those lines, your own marketing automation tools, your own CRM, that you can use to help feed into your strategy. And so, using the tools that you have to really understand the analytics, the Google Search Console, your keywords. There's a lot of internal data that you can leverage to be able to create those trends. But there are also external data to help validate what you're seeing within your own existing data, because you don't want to get into a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where you are looking at only just what you're seeing within your own ecosystem. Because your world isn't just your own ecosystem, it's all of your audience, it's all of the potential market. And so, at BrightTALK, we tend to take, obviously look at our internal data, understand what we're seeing, but then also look at external data sources to help validate and enrich our existing data. So to give you an idea, in terms of topics and social listening, BrightTALK uses BuzzSumo, SEMrush, Sprout Social to really get a sense of, how are people responding and interacting with us from a brand perspective, but also what topics and what do other audiences care about, because it's so crucial to make sure that you are not just creating the content that you have seen work well on your site, but where are those gaps? And so, taking this a little bit deeper, BrightTALK has quite a few strengths in terms of audience data that we leverage quite a bit within our own planning and strategizing. So, first and foremost, we use what's called BrightTALK Insights. So if you are a BrightTALK client, we have a tool within BrightTALK that allows you to look at some topics and see what different companies, different job titles are viewing that content from an intent perspective. We have a kind of a built-out version of this. One of our strengths is this volume of this data, and so we use this quite a bit to understand what we're trying to see. And so, that's one part of it. Our own product and platform data is another part. So, like I said, we have 10 million users on BrightTALK, and we're able to see what different topics and trends and content types are becoming popular with different segments of our audience. And so we're able to use that data for our own content, but also to help advise our clients on the right content to create and the right topics. We also do a lot of survey research. We do a quarterly survey across a number of different audiences. So from our professional audience perspective to understand, how do professionals learn and grow, which we'll cover a little bit later. We look at how marketers and kind of the wider marketing landscape is changing due to COVID. That's another report that we recently produced this year. But again, this is something that we have the internal data and we can query that to create content. Again, another strength that we have is that we work with a lot of partners. A lot of those partners are industry leaders, and so we often work with industry leaders to understand what are they seeing from their perspective? Where do they think their industry is going to go the next 6 months, 12 months, next year, next 5 years? So that we're covering the right topics that are interested across all 8 different communities that we manage on BrightTALK, from IT, marketing, sales, HR. And again, we also have commercial CRM data and our own Google Analytics and Google Search Console. So, we're looking at, how are people coming to us? Where are they going within our site? And understanding from a certain data points, such as time on page, as well as obviously bounce rates, how we're going to acquiring audiences, then where are they going through our site? But some external sources that we also leverage, and this is just looking at a wider market, understanding larger customer needs, and really validating, like I said, what your data is already showing. But we use, SEMrush, BuzzSumo, Feedly. All of these are great. One is the social listening tool. Two are social listening tools. The other are kind of more content ideas. So Feedly and BuzzSumo provide content ideas, what content's being shared across different social platforms, across different topics, what questions are being asked, what news topics are trending, so that we can be ahead of the curve and responding to these upcoming trends early, before anyone else can. And I think that's a big part of it is, as more and more content and clients are creating content, and more marketers are creating content, you need to be able to cut through the digital noise. And there's a few different ways to do that. Obviously, being the first one to talk about a topic, or being one of the first ones to do so, and doing it from your perspective, is an easy way to create content without and being out there first. But we also look at industry trends and reports. I research probably, I don't know, anywhere between 5 to 10 hours a week, looking at different websites, publications that I trust and I find have really great content, because they build a relationship with me over time. And I continue to look at the state of different industries. I look at different survey results, and I take that as all research that feeds into the idea generation that we'll do down the road. But last but not least, competitor analysis. What are your competitors doing well? What are they not doing well? How can you tap into that? Because all of this data, it needs to feed into your content teams, so that they're creating, not only content that works well from your audience, but also works for an audience that you don't know yet. And so it's really important to make sure you have both sources coming in, and you're analyzing both to make the right judgment calls. So just an example, BrightTALK has been looking into our own Google Search Console to look at what topics are people searching for within our site. Because we want to understand, what do people need? This is intent data. This is direct search data that shows what people are actually looking for. And so you'll see that, not surprisingly, a lot of this content is very much actionable content. It's answering questions. They want a welcome speech. They want to know how to introduce. They want to know how to moderate, how we can introduce the speaker. Very, very easy parts of a webinar production that they might not know how, because they haven't done it before, not done it enough. And so because we have that experience, and because we have that knowledge, making sure that we are covering these topics is crucial. However, it's not just these topics. I want to make sure this is clear, because this is only looking at the traffic that we have on our site. This doesn't look at the larger market. And so we want to make sure that not only are we covering these topics, because this is core topics that we want to create around a topic cluster, but it's also stuff that we need to make sure we're doing for our audience, in addition to everything else we should be covering, because we have gaps just like everyone else. And part of what we're looking to do over the next year is fill in those gaps by identifying our topic clusters to understand what are our pillar topics and terms we want to cover with, and what are our anchors, and building our content strategy from that. If you don't know about topic clusters or topic anchors, I highly recommend. I love HubSpot. I'm a big HubSpot fan. They do a really great job explaining topic clusters. I highly recommend checking out their explanation, but it's a really easy way to create content with SEO in mind. But what are strategies to kind of analyze your performance? And so, really, what BrightTALK does and what we do on a regular basis is understand, kind of across 4 different things. And so this is kind of what we're doing currently as part of our planning for 2021. So, first and foremost, competitor analysis. And so for us, BrightTALK has a number of different competitors across different markets. we have a webinar platform as part of it. We also have audience and lead generation. And so, we do need to look at how are these different markets creating content, which of their content is really performing well. And there are a number of different tools out there in order to help understand what your competitors are doing well, what pages are ranking the most, getting the most traffic, what topics, keywords, etc. But really understanding where are their strengths, but where are they also missing, and where are they missing where you have a strength. And so, to give you an example, many webinar platforms don't have an audience. And so a lot of our messaging when we are talking with customers will be around, yes, we are a webinar platform. We have, feature parity across these different platforms, but, what we also have is a built-in audience. And that's really for us the value proposition that sells. And so we do focus a lot on our audience as part of our go-to-market strategy. But with that also becomes, SWOT analysis. So really understanding what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are your opportunities, and kind of what are the threats, for you being successful. So, for BrightTALK, for example, our strength is our data. We have 10 million users with, a million active users, rough give or take, a month interacting with content. And so across all those different, job titles, job function, all those audience members, we're able to see certain trends across topics, across different job levels and different audience segments, so that we can provide that knowledge for our audience as well as for our clients, as well as feed that into our content strategy. Keyword and SEO analysis, I think, is crucial for content. Understanding, what keyword gaps you have and where you're losing audience is crucial. Again, there's just a lot of content out there about how to do this. To be, authentic with you guys, I don't want to focus too much on this, but it is important to know that you need to be looking not only where you're ranking, but where are you not ranking, and kind of what are the niche topics that you could be ranking on because it fits your product suite and your company so well. And then finally, a content audit. So understanding again, where you've understood where you have your gaps, but really, taking it next further, but analyze and organize your content around, your content around your topics that you set on, and making sure that you start creating content on a steady cadence, filling in those gaps where you need them. And so, there's a lot of research out there about how to do this. I highly recommend that you guys focus on looking at how you can implement this within your own business. Because this has a lot of strengths and a lot of structure to help you get to the level of insights you need to make the right decisions. And so, that from a high level, that's kind of looking at a data-driven content strategy. But I really want to start talking about how do you take some of that data and really focusing on more of an editorial strategy and converting that into content. Because it's so important that, you've kind of understood where your audience is coming from, what they care about, where you're doing well, what your competitor's not doing well, but how you convert that into insights that converts into content is kind of the next level. And so what we're going over to next is a few different data points around why you need to be creating certain types of content and certain cadence of content in order to create a experience that engages your audience across your customer journey. So, first and foremost, and this is from the BrightTALK benchmark report. So if you haven't checked it out, please do. The reason why people view content and continue to learn and grow, there's a few different reasons. But what we're finding why people view content is they need to understand what they need to know. So number one is to keep up to date with what's happening in your industry. They want to improve the quality of work you do. They want to discover new things, acquire a new body of skills, and for the joy of learning, right? And so, these motivations are all reasons why, you have your audience members viewing content. They're all reasons why they're looking to continue to learn and grow. Because, today's day and age, the content's available. It's just going out there and spending time to do it. And a lot of your professionals are. We found in our survey that most professionals more than half of professionals are viewing at least 2 hours of professional development content every week. This is a big opportunity for you to tap into some of these motivations And so, as we talk about what content to create, you want to keep these in mind. There are a variety of different motivations. Some of these are beneficial for you as a marketer. Some of these are not. The joy of learning is getting someone engaged because they love to learn is great. You're helping teach, but they're likely not going to be buying something anytime soon. But what you've done is created a relationship with them so that when they are ready, they already know who to go to. For example, I used HubSpot in a personal project, earlier this year. I used them because they have been engaging me and nurturing me for the past probably 2 to 3 years. And I've never had a need until I had a need for a CRM system. And because I knew how well their system worked, I moved over to it, right? These are motivations that you can tap into, especially with the type of content you create and the kind of format you use. So, but a big part of this, is with this creating this digital experience, is creating expectation by creating a certain cadence of content. So I think it's really important that, as you think about your strategy and how to turn this into content, you don't overcommit yourself to beyond the resources you have, right? So, I think it's, I talked about earlier about the BrightTALK's trying to create anywhere 12 to 20 pieces of content. We're able to do that because we have a lot of internal experts, partners, and whatnot that feeds into that content. We would never create that content if we had a team of 1, 2, or 3. And so, but it's super important that no matter how much content you are creating, you do it at consistent cadence and not doing it every once in a while and sporadically. And so, because what we're starting to see is that professionals are viewing content, on a very steady cadence. Over 94% are viewing monthly, and 33% are viewing weekly or daily. That's a huge amount of content that they're viewing. And there's an opportunity for you to be a part of that learning journey and be a part and help them and bring them as part of your customer journey. But also part of that is thinking about the structure in your content, right? And so, there is interest among professionals in kind of this organized structure of series because it sets a certain expectation with your audience. They know that if it's a series, it's going to be a certain number of parts. There's going to be a continuing story thread throughout. And it sets that behavior sets that behavior for your audience, but also gives you a structure to create your content. And so, there's a lot of opportunity there for you to tap into existing behaviors as long as you're able to create that level of content that you want to be able to create. In a future episode, I believe either the next one or the one after that, we'll be talking about how to turn your content plan to scalable operations. And I'll show you how BrightTALK has moved our operations into a more automated fashion so we can work with more internal experts in a more scalable manner. But it's important that you're only creating content at the cadence that you can sustain and maintain that cadence for as long as you can. But in addition to that, obviously with content, content format is crucial. We did survey our audience that was obviously viewing webinars. So not surprisingly, we saw webinars as a top method for learning and growing. But different formats influence how you connect your audience. And they help you either by entertaining, by either inspiring, by educating, or by persuading. And so, it's important to consider this relationship between format and purpose. And because each, and I took this from 90 Black, I think it's a really great infographic that shows the different type of content formats and how those different formats tend to kind of go into these different quadrants. Because you can either, by entertaining, you're providing some kind of entertainment. It's more of an awareness play. You're trying to acquire people's data and acquire their contact information. And so through virals, through quizzes, competitions, right? They are, this is exciting and fun. They might win something. And so, it's not surprising that entertainment, kind of falls within that. I think there's a lot to do in inspiring. So reviews tend to be a lot around inspiring. I also think celebrity endorsements, works for B2C. I have found that actually celebrity endorsements don't work as well for B2B. I do find that industry experts themselves, those who hold their industry knowledge around the industry is super important. There's a lot of data out there around this. Actually, something we'll be covering in a future episode. But in addition to that, I think you can also inspire by doing interviews with with inspirational individuals or industry leaders if you're B2B. So, I think podcasts, there's a lot of information there, and you do educate quite a bit there as well. But if you're speaking with someone that's very high level, well-known industry, it can definitely be inspirational. Education, this could be kind of the forefront. I find that, of all the quadrants, education tends to be the one content that BrightTALK creates the most, and probably the one content that, and it just tends to be harder, but the one content that our clients don't create as much, because they're trying to convert as much as they can. But as part of our ecosystem, you need to acquire audiences through our platform or just in your own ecosystem. And so, educating, looking at the original data, looking at how infographics can provide quick insights. It's all about informing your audience without selling, because they need to know what they need to know, right? As we go back to the motivations, the number one motivation was understanding, what's going on in the industry. And this is where education really it has a whole really large strength, and something that you really need to be focusing on in order to acquire audience. But again, don't forget that you need to be also looking to convince and then bringing them down the customer journey. So interactive demos, reports, case studies, data sheets, all of these are really great for people that are looking to consideration and eventually to valuation. And this is something you shouldn't be ignoring. Oftentimes I think the formats tend to be more limited. So data sheets, calculations, tend to be more written content. Webinars here tend to be more condensed. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there's a combination. I think it can have many different purposes. But you need to make sure that the content you're choosing to create is tapping into this type of emotional appeal or rational appeal, as well as across this the decision-making process. And so for BrightTALK, BrightTALK buckets our content into these following categories. And so as you see here, what we have looked at is what content are we creating, as well as content we want to create. And so, for example, for us, we're looking at category leadership. For us, this is thought leadership, right? This is us talking about our point of view and sharing that knowledge out with the world. So this I would consider be either a category leadership aspect or foundational excellence. And so, or this series, I would say. Foundational excellence, right? How to, really the basics, right? Because you don't know how much your audience knows. They could be either be well knowledge and understand, very complicated processes, complicated technologies, theories, etc., or they are focusing, or they don't. And so you need to create content to help them educate themselves. It's also a great way to bring people through SEO. Excerpt interviews. We run a series of interviews with marketers, which uses both internal expert speakers to speak on these timely topics. Right. I think the benefit here is this timeliness, allowing you to create relevance that might be kind of a short shelf life of content, but allows you to attract audience quickly because it's tapping into whatever's happening that day. Award and customer stories. A series of stories champion customers. And showing what peers are doing and how you can learn from those peers. One of the, I think as we were looking at which presenters can perform best, the top two that point out from us from our research as well as from outside research has been industry leaders, but also peers. People want to hear how other people similar to them, normal people, normal professionals who have similar problems and how their problems were solved. And so this has such strength in telling your story and showing how much value you have. Frameworks and blueprints. These are more actionable strategies. Think templates. They allow you to create actionable content that they can go take and use elsewhere. Right. I think that's really important. It's actually something that we're building up now. So attached to this presentation, for example, is the BrightTALK blueprint. Which walks you through how to plan for content, how to learn how to how to plan, how to measure, how to execute, and scale your content. It's meant to give you something to take away, so that you are continually use it down the road. And when you have a need from us, you'll think about us, right? And then research and reports. This is where the original research comes in. And turning that into reports, again, that can be takeaways, but providing that value and providing that original research, which is so crucial to engaging with your audience. But this is where we're starting to focus our content on, and kind of in these different categories. Because content, as you're thinking about content and creating content, it needs to be discoverable, it needs to be readable, it needs to be understandable, actionable, shareable, and relatable, right? And so there are, I think, a few different elements that you need to think about when you're creating your content and choosing which formats to pick. And so, for example, like the length and frequency. So I'll take this series as an example. This is an hour-long presentation that I run monthly or every other month. And so the reason why I do that, the frequency on a monthly basis is because the length of the content is an hour long. It's quite a long piece of content, and I can't expect someone to show up an hour every week. It's a lot to expect. And so, thinking about how your content length and frequency depends on also where you distribute that content. So I'm going to jump to the very bottom. Where you're going to host and share that content. So certain formats, as you guys all know, certain formats do well on certain platforms. So having more short form video content works well on social compared to more written content. There's a lot of research and data around that. And so, but also thinking about the medium. How are you going to display this content? Is it a video, webcam, webinar, white paper, blog, ebook, etc.? Is it what is the editorial direction? Is it going to be evergreen, or is it more time sensitive? What's the theme? What's the tone? Kind of topic depth, right? We talked about have this foundational excellence. That's meant to be more high level, very introductory content, but that won't work for all audiences. And so as you think about the editorial direction, you need to think about what level of knowledge does your audience need to have in order to be effective and really understand your content. Structure, how are you going to display this content internally within the content itself? Is it going to be just a presentation like this? Is it going to be a discussion with multiple people? Is it going to be more of a debate? Is it an analysis with an analyst? Is it news responsive? Are you responding back to news that just broke? Is it one-on-one how-to content, right? There's a lot of, and then finally, again, that purpose. What are you trying to achieve with that content? It doesn't need to be just one, but generally speaking, different formats and different content types lead to different aspects, as we showed before. And so as you're thinking about what content to create, what formats to create, it's really important to really consider your formats as well as these elements in order to make sure that you're creating the right type of content for the right platform for the right audience. And so, this has been overly simplified, but what we're looking to do and what I recommend many people start off with is, again, understanding really the data that you have, using your existing tools, and finding external tools that help support your data. You need to understand where you are to figure out where you're going, and understanding where your strengths are, what you're not doing great, and where you can have room to improve is completely necessary in order to create a strategy. Creating content across a number of different formats and consistent cadence, I think is crucial. You need to make sure that you are not just focusing on one, but focusing on a variety. It doesn't need to be equal volume per content format. You don't need to create, if you're going to create 10 blog posts, you don't need to create 10 videos, right? Certain different formats have a certain level of ease in terms of creation of content, as well as just where that content fits upon the customer journey. If you need to acquire more leads from your waterfall, and you need to acquire from a first touch basis, then there are certain formats that align better to that. Blogs, we use webinars for that. To be honest, we use webinars for everything. So across the customer journey, so we find it effective across the board. But making sure that you're doing it on a consistent manner and doing it on at a specific cadence, because this is the expectation that you're creating with your audience. And as they sign up for your newsletters or blog, they're expecting a certain level of cadence of content, and by breaking that cadence, you start breaking that trust a little bit. So only do what you're comfortable doing with content creation or content volume you're able to do. And then, finally, measure, test, and optimize your content constantly. At BrightTALK, we look at content, before, during, and after when we present. So, after this presentation, I'm going to be looking at the feedback, looking at the questions, looking at analyzing to be able to feedback into my next presentation, how to make that better. But be able to have the visibility to look into this is important. So you need to have the tools available to be able to look at and be able to test and optimize this. But it's incredibly important for you to be doing this on a consistent basis, because a content strategy, once you create content strategy, this isn't a one and done situation. It should be a learning, it should be a living and breathing document that you're continually updating and improving over time. As you get more data, you test new things, and you see what works. So for me, this is a process that you'll do, and as long as you have everything set up, you can continually tweak, make tests, and improve your content going forward. And on that note, that is the end of the presentation. But we have a number of different questions, so I'd like to get through those. And so, the first one. So data measurement. So here's the first question from our audience. Data measurement are usually for marketing content. Can we measure engagement and usage of documentation? Are there any data points that we can consider? So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking if there's a way to measure kind of the more measure engagement and usage of documentation. I think there are a lot of different data points across the different formats you're looking at, as well as different content, right? So if you look at websites, obviously everyone's gonna be looking at page traffic, bounce rates, time on page, I think is super important. I think that shows how level of engagement and intent that someone is. It does depend on how long your content is. So if you know that a blog post is gonna take about 5-10 minutes to read, you should expect that. But looking at the completion rate of that content, I think, is also important. So something that I look at for when I measure webinar performance is how many users viewed most of the content. So looking at the completion rate of that content. So it really depends on the format that you're looking at, depending on the format and the type of content you're creating. Will the slide deck be shared with attendees? Yes, it will be. It should be attached to this presentation right now. Let's see. So how does BrightTALK track attribution? Is a third-party software internal? So we have a Salesforce object that we built in conjunction with a different company. I'm blanking on the name, unfortunately, right now, but we've built something to look at all of our campaigns to understand and customize, look at from that first last touch and all the touch in between what's happening. So we've built something within Salesforce where we're measuring this, and as you saw, we're pulling all that data into Excel to really get into a document that has kind of all the data points from one perspective. So one last question, or excuse me, two last questions. So how do you learn your competitors' traffic pages? So there are a few different websites out there that help you kind of analyze your competitors' traffic. It doesn't give you, extreme level of data like your Google Analytics will, but it'll give you an idea of what traffic pages, what top keywords they tend to be ranking on, and where you're having gaps. So there's lots of tools out there. I think you can search and find one. I don't have a particular one that I love. I think there's different value depending on different use cases for it. So it really depends on what you're trying to do and what you're looking at specifically. I looked at Ahrefs as well as some keyword gaps. WordStream I've used a bit. There's a number out there. I would highly recommend you go look at and see what tools out there that works best depending on your need. The BrightTALK bucket of contents. How would you classify into different stages of the customer journey? So that's a good question. I don't think that I think that certain content types of those fit cleanly in some, while some kind of go across different kind of parts of the customer journey. So say, for example, the category leadership as well as the foundational excellence would be more kind of acquisition. You're looking to, acquire that audience. because it's not really focusing about us or our brand, our services. It's really just providing value, right? It's the first touch. It's the first opportunity in which we're trying to build that relationship with our audience and create that trust. And so it's important for us to have that kind of foundation there, so that if people don't know what they should know, that we have content around that, or if they want to continue to be up to date on industry trends, we have that. And so, it's really important that you're covering that. I would say some of our series that we would cover would also be based on thought leadership, that category leadership, and more about acquiring and awareness. I would say obviously customer stories starts to get more consideration, right? They're looking at solving their problems, because a lot of that content around solving problems. And so I would say that content tends to be focused around there. And then I would say templates as well as reports tend to be, again, a mix of consideration as well as awareness. Those category buckets, I don't think we cover data sheets or product demos, which obviously would be more around decisions, evaluating content, so evaluating products. So those buckets are really more about kind of the earlier parts of the customer journey. But there is opportunity for you to use those to engage and nurture and upsell your current clients. Let's see. Any advice on content with monthly frequency? My goal is to send out a monthly newsletter. Yeah, I think if you're gonna do a monthly news, I think that's great. I think a monthly newsletter is great. I would focus on looking at what are the high level trends of that month and what other content you have that supplements that content. And so, I find if you're doing it on a monthly basis with less frequency, I tend to make content a little bit longer. If you're doing a weekly digest, it's just that, it's a digest, it's supposed to be shorter. So it really depends. If it's monthly, I tend to have to be a little more in depth. You don't want to make it too long. And you also want to get people back to your website. If you're creating or writing blog posts or writing articles, if you're aggregating data sources, that's fine too. You're giving value by making it easy for people to find that content that you found valuable. So, it really, I think there's a lot of value in it. And I wouldn't necessarily say that, I would definitely do at least monthly. I think anything less than that, I don't think people are going to remember that you sent out a newsletter. So I would say no less than monthly. How much of your marketing effort is outbound versus inbound? Good question. So I would say, I don't know the percentage on top of my head, but we do both. So we have a lot of inbound. So, for our situation, we're a little bit unique, like I mentioned before. We have 10 million users, so we're able to generate leads from our own data, which is a unique prospect. That being said, though, we do have a lot of our SDRs and sales execs outreaching and doing cold calls and identifying accounts. One, help build up our target accounts, but also to create pipeline. And so I would say it's definitely a mix. Can't give you a percentage immediately, but we definitely do both, even with the volume of data that we have. But that being said, if you have enough volume of leads coming in inbound, you don't need to do outbound. If you can't, you need to be able to process leads you have, and obviously, in the ones that are coming to you, filling in contact forms and whatnot, are going to have the highest level of intent and engagement, and those should be prioritized regardless. It doesn't mean that you're not missing out on opportunity, but again, depending on just how much resources you have to follow up with leads. And the last question is the monthly webinar, is a monthly better than weekly? If you can do weekly, that's great. I don't think it's required. I think it really depends on really your capacity. So, and I subscribe to a number of weekly digests because I want to know what's happening that week. New news breaks out, new trends are coming out, new research, new reports, and I subscribe to a number of different publications and industry leaders that aggregate a lot of that data for me. And so, I've always enjoyed weekly, but it really depends on two things. I think one, your resources, but also what your audience expects and kind of the depth of your content. Are you really technical? I don't think you necessarily need to go weekly. So it really depends on who you're trying to target. And on that note, I'm running out of time, as well as my computer is dying. So I will be leaving and wrapping up. But I wanted to thank everyone today for participating, and I hope that you found value in what we discussed. And I want to thank you for joining the second episode of the Content Intelligence series. I just noticed that the presentation is not yet in the attachments. It will be within the next few minutes following the end of this presentation, so you can look out for it then. That being said, I hope you found value in what we discussed today. If you did, please provide feedbacks and ratings through the player. If you didn't, also please provide feedback and ratings. We look at this content and we look at this feedback and really try and incorporate it into future episodes, future content. So please take some time, give us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Again, before you go, you'll find some additional resources in the attachments button on the inner player at the bottom of your player. And that should help you with your content strategy, a blueprint that will help you kind of start planning your content. Take a look at how BrightTALK looks at how we execute on content, and give you some templated guides to do that. But again, thank you for joining in. Tune in next time as we discuss how to take the content strategy and turn that into a content plan. And so we'll be talking about ways to create a scalable content model that allows you to turn larger pieces of content into smaller pieces, and allow you to hit that content volumes you want to create, as well as the volumes you need to hit for your demand generation. And with that, my name is Nick Marquith, and have a great day. Thank you.